Hey everybody, this is Chris. Today we're going to do another edition of Basic Hand Tool Education. We're going to do draw knives, planes, and spokeshaves. And joining me today is James Wright from the YouTube channel Wood By Wright.
That then brings us on. You ready for it?
Ready. Here we go. One of my favorite tools is the drawknife. Now a drawknife has a long thin blade or knife. It's typically single bevel with two handles. And the intent is for you to draw the knife towards you. Hence the name the drawknife. Now traditionally you'd use what's called a shaving horse to hold the wood so your hands would be free to use the drawknife. If you don't have a shaving horse, then you just use a regular bench vise. Now draw knives are especially effective in removing wood quickly and efficiently and shaping curved surfaces. Anything from dowels to bowls. You can do some very precise carving with this. The key is the angle of the blade. Now one mistake people often make is they try and take too much off at once. They come in at a high angle, a lot of force, straight on. And what happens, you get tear out. So what you want to do with a very thick removal is that you come at it at an angle. You chamfer each side, then take a little bit off the top. I'm going to contour this piece of wood here. And basically how I do this, I start on each side, chamfer it down instead of coming with one big chunk here. Slowly work my way in. You can see I continue to work around it, chamfering each side before I take the flat. That way you're shaping it little by little, and when you get down to the flat surface, then you can come at it straight on. But instead of coming at it with a high angle, you come at it with a low angle, removing a small amount each time. Now let's talk about different types of draw knives. They can be very small and very large. And they're used for not only shaping wood, but this particular draw knife was used to dehide hogs. They come with adjustable handles, ones that fold up. Now my favorite draw knife, I got this at the flea market for $2. It's got a short, thin blade, and it works magnificently. Now, here's another type of draw knife. It's actually got two bevels, and this is used for debarking wood. I personally don't think it works very good. I'd rather use a standard draw knife, but you can push or pull this to debark wood. And this is a Cooper's chamfer draw knife. Now a Cooper is a barrel maker, and this was used to chamfer the inside of the barrel staves. Now let's talk about sharpening. Now for most draw knives with a straight blade, it's just like a chisel. I'll take a flat stone, flatten the bottom side, and then I'll take another stone and I'll typically just sharpen the edge like this. It's not really complicated. And then I'll stroke it. And that's basically all you need to do. Keep in mind that even though you may have a long blade, you typically only use the center inch or two. Now for a curved blade, obviously you'd sharpen it just like you would a gouge. So you'd have some curved tools. You still want to keep one side flat, and then you want to work the other side. Now, I buy all of my draw knives either from auctions or flea markets. So I want to talk a little bit about what I look for when I buy a draw knife. And it's pretty straightforward. It's just like what I look for when I buy a chisel. And that is, you don't look at what the top surface look like, you turn it over. Because the bottom side has to be flat and smooth, look for pitting on the bottom side. If there's any pitting at all or damage to the edge itself, you shouldn't buy it. Because then you have to resurface the entire bottom surface. If there's pitting on the top, as long as it's not close to the edge, it's okay, but pitting on the bottom, that's just trouble. And typically on draw knives, I think because they're always stored up on a wall, they're normally in pretty good shape. Now the other thing that you'll find is that the wooden handle will be cracked or loose. And that's typically not a big deal. I just sand it down so it's smooth and squirt some glue down in the middle, and that'll harden in there and that will take away the looseness. Now, if you're wondering why you can't find a draw knife at a flea market, it's because I've already bought it. I love my draw knives. Now let's go on to my least favorite tool, the plane. And so I've asked James Wright from YouTube channel Wood By Wright to talk about it.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Planes are something that are kind of a joy to me, so I wanted to kind of go through basically how they are put together and some of the misnomers that people might have. In a traditional Bailey-style plane, you have a frog, which is where the iron or the blade actually sits down and beds against. Then you have a blade or an iron and a chip breaker, and then a lever cap. And all of these kind of sandwich together to hold the blade in place and go through the wood nicely. On most traditional planes, the bevel side is actually down, which will confuse a lot of people. But it puts in there, you can clamp it together, and you're basically ready to go. The three things on setting up a hand plane for different works and different uses. Number one, the mouth. How big is the mouth? If you have a very large mouth, it allows you to take large chips and to take a lot of material off. But it's going to leave you with a rougher surface. If you make that mouth smaller, it's going to give you a cleaner surface. You can do that by moving the frog, which is this piece here that the iron's bed on. You can move that forward and backward if you loosen those screws. Some planes actually have a mouth up front that will move to close the mouth. Number two is how close is the chip breaker to the front of the blade. In this case, I have the chip breaker less than a 1/16 inch away from the blade. That's great for smoothing, getting that final surface. You can get a really nice clean surface when it's close. But you can't make a very deep cut. If you back it up a good ways, for a lot of my other planes, like this jack, I'll keep it about an 1/8 inch away. And that will give you the difference between a really heavy cut and a really fine, nice, clean cut. And then number three is how sharp is the blade. And I like to actually test the blade by shaving hair on my arm. And most blades, if they're anywhere near sharp, are going to shave some hair. But a really truly sharp blade is going to shave every single hair it touches the first time. It'll take one pass and it makes a completely clean shave on your arm. And that's how I like to dry it, but a lot of different people have other methods of sharpening a blade.
You don't have to show us that now. We don't want any blood. I don't want any blood in this video, so let's just assume it's sharp, okay?
Speaking of sharpening, there are two main camps when it comes to sharpening a plane iron. Number one, they're the people who do it freehand, and I have a coarse, medium, and fine, so this is like 600 grit all the way up to about a 1200 grit. Other people are going to have different grits, whatever, it doesn't really matter. I end around 1200 grit and then go on to a strop. But the two main camps are number one, freehand, and so you can actually sit on here and rock it until it meets that bevel. And then you lock your arms and body and go at it at that angle. Or number two, the easiest way for a beginner is setting it in a honing guide. And this will allow you to clamp it at a specific distance and you can roll it on that and sharpen it. And so for sharpening, I just go through a coarse, a medium, a fine, and then I'll do 20 or 30 strops on the strop. And this is just a piece of leather with a honing compound in it. And this will get you your mirror finish and give you a really nice clean surface. It's like a 60,000, about a 16,000 grit sandpaper, if you kind of keep that in mind. Now when adjusting the plane, there are several different things you're looking for. Number one, you're looking for the depth of cut, in other words, moving in and out. And on a Bailey pattern plane, that's actually done with this screw. That screw moves this leather up and down, so it engages and retracts the blade. But then the second thing you want is its lateral adjustment. And so in other words, it's kind of pivoting. And if it's turned one way, one corner of the blade is sticking down farther than the other corner. And this lever on the side actually will turn the blade side to side, so you can adjust that lateral adjustment. And so when it's all in there, then you can either feel it with your finger very carefully, and it's sticking out a good long ways. And I like to just touch it with my finger, and I can tell this side is sticking out a little farther than this side. So I want to push the lever towards the high side. Some people like to actually sight down the plane as opposed to feeling it. And if you look all the way down, you'll actually see it sticking up a little bit higher on one side than the other. I don't find that quite as accurate myself, but everyone's a little bit different. Now, for hand tools, you're usually going to be wanting to pick something a little bit softer than white oak, but that's what I have in stock right now, so we'll play with that. Usually what you want to do is you want to be behind the plane. You don't want to be beside it because you're going to be running along it. And if you have a longer board and you're out here in the middle of it, you still want to be turning so that your hip is angled towards the plane. You want your arm to be in line with the plane so that you're actually pushing with it as opposed to pushing beside it. Normal things that you're gonna feel over time that this is far easier than this. So I like to actually keep my hip behind the plane, my arm in line with the plane, and then when I start at the beginning of the board, I'm going to be putting all my weight up here on the front. That way I'm not actually leaning down, because if I lean down, I'm going to be taking off more on this front edge. And then as I go all the way through the board, to end, I'm actually almost going to take my hand off of the front and have all the weight on the back here so that I'm not rounding out the end of the board. And it's a little bit of a ballet of going from one side to the other. And something you just kind of learn over time that if you're putting too much weight on the end, this end will start rounding off and your board will get a hump in it. Now, another thing that you can do to make it a little bit easier is, number one, when you're pushing it through straight like this, it can be a bit tough, especially when you're hitting knots and hard points. So what you can actually do is bevel it a little bit, and what this will end up doing is effectively lowering the angle of the iron because it's coming in turned. The actual cutting angle is lower. So right now, if I'm going straight on, this is about 45 degrees. Whereas if I turn it, it might be down to like 40 degrees. So it actually feels a little bit easier to push it through on an angle. The one downside to turning the plane and putting it at an angle is that you have less material, less sole that is actually on the work. So it has more of a tendency to be able to ride up and down with the swells and the wood. Now, if you're using it to smooth in your final preparations, that's not a lot of problem. But if you're using it to flatten the board, that might cause undulations in the wood. And so the more you can keep it in line, the more plane you're going to have on the wood, the less chance it's going to leave a dip or a valley in the wood. That then brings us on to the length of the plane. A number 4 is about 9 inches long, whereas a number 5 is about 15, and then you start getting up into the 7 and the 8, which are up to 24 inches long. And this then comes into what plane do you choose for what wood do you want to use. The longer the plane is, the more you're going to be able to flatten a board, because if there is a valley in the wood, the plane iron is not going to reach that valley and cut out because it's being held up by the mountain on either side. And if there's a mountain in the board, it's going to hit that mountain. So eventually you're going to take down all the high spots without hitting any of the low spots. So a long plane is fantastic for that. But if my board is this long, I don't really need this long of a plane to joint it because I'm going to be sticking off both ends. That's a wasted amount of plane. And it's heavier. This takes a lot more force. So I could use a number 5, and because it's the vast majority of the length, this length of the sole is going to be able to flatten it nicely. And in this case, this one is actually short enough that I could flatten it with a number 4. The rule of thumb is you want your plane to be no less than 1/2 of the length of the board. So in this case, the board is about a little less than twice the length of this, so this would be able to flatten it nicely. So that's a little bit about the traditional Bailey style metal hand plane, or even the older wooden hand planes. They work on the same principle, just different methods of adjustment. You also then can get into all of these other weird hand planes and other intricacies that follow the same principles but do a lot of other different work. This is a compass plane and has a curved sole, so if you ever have a curve in a stretcher or a stringer, this will allow you to either curve convex or you can actually turn it into a concave so that it will do either or. You can also then get into molding planes that come into any shape and size you'd ever want. And these allow you to do, well, moldings, like on a crown molding or door moldings, and you can put in any shape you want. This is just a scrap piece I had lying in my shop. But they are fairly simple and fun to be able to make whatever shape you would want or desire. And you can even make these into a specific shape that you would want. Some of the molding planes actually come with either hollows or rounds. And so in other words, they would either be concave or convex. And with just a set of hollows and rounds, you can make any shape you want fairly quickly and easily, and with a lot of fun. So that was just a quick overview on hand planes in general. There's a lot more I could do in this, and I could go on for hours and hours and hours on this, but I'm not going to do that. So I just want to say thanks, Chris, for the opportunity for putting this out there, and I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, have a wonderful day.
Hey, thanks, James. That was terrific. Now, let's move on to the last tool, and that is the spokeshave. Now, a spokeshave is basically a cross between a drawknife and a plane, and it's intended for precise contour carving. And really, the drawknife and the spokeshave go hand in hand. You'll typically remove the bulk of the wood with the drawknife and then finish with a spokeshave. One last thing, spokeshaves, they're two-handed and they're intended to either push or pull based on the grain direction. Now you can see I've contoured it, but there's still some rough parts, and I could continue to work it with the drawknife, but now I'm going to use my spokeshave, which can do a much better job. Now let's look at a variety of spokeshave designs. Some can be very large, very small. The simplest of spokeshaves have a slightly curved wooden handle and a slightly curved blade. And these two tangs are press fit into the wood, and that's how you adjust it. And it's single bevel. Or even a curved blade design. The older ones are all wood. The newer ones are all metal. Now, looking at this in more detail, a lot of the older ones have a wood flat surface here where the wood comes out. And over time, that wood gets worn away. So the newer ones will have metal here, and that'll preserve it. I've also seen some with ivory. And going back to the older ones, you adjust them completely by pushing this tang in and out. And it's a press fit, and as the wood changes on you, you'd make the adjustment of how wide this is open. Now a newer one has these adjustments on it, which allow you to make the gap wider or smaller. Then here's another example where these screws, you loosen them on the tang and then you can adjust this. And this one is the same. You can use these screws to adjust the depth here, but you can also adjust how wide open it is. So lots of adjustment here. Then the newer metal ones are set up just like a plane. I don't like the newer ones. I like the ones where you can adjust it on the fly. When you're just adjusting the tang in and out, as you're taking wood off, the grain changes, and so it's easier just to adjust this way. In terms of sharpening, it's very much like sharpening a gouge. Even the straight blade has a slight curve to it. So you just want to make sure that you keep that flat. Then I'll take a diamond sharpener and just put the edge on it on this side. Same with the curved pieces. As much as you can. You want to keep that bottom part flat and then sharpen the edge, the bevel on this side. Well, that concludes today's class. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what other tools you'd like to see. And please subscribe to James and my YouTube channel. I'll have the links in the cards in the description section. Thank you.